The following is a Hoop Ball presentation.
Dude, I'm hyped. It's so long since we were going for a while. I went back and looked at our old episodes and saw how much we did, and it was crazy. And you'd have been running it well before I even got it. So it's a rich archive of just great stuff we had. So it is fun to get you back here, man. I'm happy to have you on. We talked about this before. We wanted to just have a talk on just hoops. We've had, it's been a month and change now since the NBA got shut down due to coronavirus, and we've just, watching old games or going crazy in our own interest or just kind of finding things to do. And, you came with this great idea of just talking about love of basketball, because I knew I had to get you on. We had to talk. That was going to have to happen. And here we are, and it was just the love of the game, what got us to where we are. You writing, obviously, with the NBA, but just in general, you've always been so passionate about basketball. That's been my thing as well. And so, I wanted to just, I guess, hop on into it. For you, where did the game start for you? Did you play basketball growing up? Obviously, I would imagine you did. But in general, kind of how did that grab hold of you and go, what, this is what I want to do?
Yeah, I didn't play basketball like competitively, basically past like middle school. I continued to play it like recreationally, and I just do like it's my favorite sport to play, maybe besides tennis. But I did play and I do play it recreationally. But really, what happened was it was around like 2004, I'd say, when I really started to get into sports in general. And at the time, I was in New York City, so I was a Knicks fan, and they weren't the best way to get into basketball because at that point they were either mediocre or just straight up bad. They made
Yep.
the playoffs in 2004, but then like they had like six straight losing years or six straight like almost 50 lost seasons basically. But really around that time, 2004, the first couple of years I was getting into sports and basketball specifically, it was actually the Phoenix Suns teams that really made me fall in love with the sport. And because they'd always play the late games. I'd always have to catch them on like Sports Center the morning after, or like use like the desktop computer we had as like a family to like search for their highlights and box scores. But I just remember like the ball movement, like how fast they played, for that time. The amount of 3 pointers they took, like all of it was kind of, I guess, kind of geared toward a younger audience. And I think even today, younger fans tend to gravitate towards those teams who are more offensive oriented, play fast, etc. But back then, that was the team that was playing that way when I was starting to get into the sport. And I just love, orange is my favorite color. And it was just like so many things combined from those Suns teams that like made me fall in love with them. So I followed them like kind of like second-handedly through other sources, basically for like the first couple of years of being into the sport. But basically, like 2 years in or 3 years in, I was just so hooked as a basketball fan, mainly from those Suns teams.
Laughing as you were saying that, because I, as soon as you described the Phoenix Suns and the energy, and you're talking about the colors and everything, it was like basically love it at first sight, right? with just all of that. That's fun. I didn't even. You mentioned this before in terms of, I think you were saying on Twitter, watching a classic, how much you love National Running Gun, 7 seconds or less team. But that is fun. I had a similar experience to you, growing up in New York. Growing up, I used to think that Latrell Sprewell could do no wrong, which is ironic, kind of growing up and finding out about him later. But just in terms of the way he played, I thought he was crazy good, and I was following them. It wasn't until I want to say like 2003. It was actually that time, and it was horrible timing because they had just finished their three-peat and they weren't going to win another championship for another couple of years. But the Lakers, I saw purple and gold. I like the color scheme, like you like the orange for the Suns. I said, you know what? That's my team. That's what I'm gonna follow. And I found myself convincing myself about the great attributes of Smush Park, Kwame Brown, Brian Cook, those guys. But yeah, I'm right there with you. It was just a style of play, and with the Lakers, I guess it was that dominant individual talent, and with you was that team aspect, that run and gun style. Did you have any other teams beside them? I know, just in covering teams, you've probably definitely picked up favorite players and stuff. We'll definitely get to that, but just teams that you were like, you know what? Okay, this is the team that I first grew my love with, but I've liked, I don't know, the Pelicans or whatever team you may have liked.
Yes, I mean the 7 seconds or less Suns were the team that got me into the sport. Always have fond memories of them, and even it's ironic because like you became a Lakers fan, but I actually never became a Suns fan. Um,
Wow.
and I think really why that was because, I still was basically a Knicks fan while I was falling in love with the Suns, those Suns teams, which, at the same time made me fall in love with the sport in general. But then the way, and everyone knows this by now, but the way things happened were D'Antoni left the Suns in 2008 and went to the Knicks, which was my team. So it made me kind of love the Knicks even more because, D'Antoni was the coach. I didn't really know too much about him besides the fact that he was the coach of the Suns teams that I loved. And so that really brought me into the Knicks, even more than I was, say, in 2004 through up until 2008, basically. Of course, what happened was in classic Knicks fashion, they went on to suck almost every year he was there. But there were like small moments as a Knicks fan during those years that really, continue to push my love for the game. And the Knicks, I think that the 2011-2012 Knicks, that lockout season, is one of my favorite teams that I really closely watched that team. That was one of those teams where at that point I had started watching like almost every Knicks game, whereas in 2004, 5, 6, I was just getting into it. But if
Good
anyone
timing.
if anyone doesn't remember that year, that was the Linsanity year in February of 2012. Well, that's when it first happened, and I actually was at Jeremy Lin's breakout game against the New Jersey Nets at MSG. His first breakout game of Linsanity. I think he had 25 points.
Oh,
Was challenging Darren Williams like over and over again. And the Knicks won, and then they went on that like 7-game winning streak, and he had all those games. I mean, all those memorable games. The buzzer beater, not the buzzer beater, the game winner against the Raptors. That game against the Lakers at MSG.
uh,
I had to do that one in there.
yeah.
But like Linsanity was something that was like, oh my God, like this is such a great story, like underdog, like you almost couldn't help but root for it. So that continued to push my passion for basketball and the Knicks. But then they had already traded for Melo, and I wasn't a big Carmelo Anthony fan. And just the way that season ended, where Melo came back and basically was like, I don't want Lin having the spotlight and, stuff like all those nasty reports. D'Antoni had to resign because they were clashing. And at that point, I kind of fell out of my love for the Knicks. And I don't know if it was because D'Antoni was forced to resign. Lin got hurt, and the team just like hit a plateau of Melo just like putting up numbers and the team, not being that good. And so at that point, I just kind of like stopped being a Knicks fan, like slowly graduated out of being a Knicks fan. I was like looking for a new team to root for. Because at that point I was still mostly a fan. I hadn't done any like writing or anything media wise. So I was just a basketball fan, and I wanted to have a team to root for. And so I was just looking around the league, and I happened to come across the Rockets, who were like, I was doing some like reading into the Rockets, and that's when I discovered like Daryl Morey's strategy, the analytics, the 3-pointers, and it was ironic that I was like, oh, I'm gonna try and see if the Rockets can be my new team. And this was the following season, so the 2012-2013 season. Of course, what did the Rockets do 4 days before the 2012 season opened? Was trade for James Harden,
Of course.
who I was super familiar with because obviously the Thunder were in the finals the previous year, and my brother happened to be an OKC Thunder fan, so he was telling me all about Harden for the past 3 years when he was a sixth man. So they traded for Harden. They had Lin because they signed him that year in free agency to that infamous like poison pill contract,
Yep.
and they had just like this weird, just like this collection of people that were like, I don't really know these guys, but they've got Harden, they've got Lin, they like to take 3-pointers. They're gonna be my new team. And that 2012-2013 Rocket season is like one of the more enjoyable seasons I watched as a fan, because it was almost so like innocent. Like there was no expectations. It was Harden's breakout season. They eventually had some of my favorite role players of all time, which we'll get to in terms of my favorite players ever. But a couple of them were on that team. It was just a fun team that kind of played. It was just a weird group of people that were just happened to be together at the same time and then play basketball. Like there was, because the plan, people don't remember that the plan for the Rockets, before they traded for Harden, And they had acquired all those assets to make a play for a superstar, but if they didn't trade for Harden, their big offseason was signing Lin, and signing Omer Asik, one of my favorite players ever. and how was their offseason? Like, they had Kevin McHale as coach. They had missed the playoffs the previous like 2 to 3 years. And their plan was like, Lin and Asik and role players, like, let's see what that does for us. And it's kind of ironic because like, Sam Hinkie was a part of the front office, and his whole thing was like not staying in mediocrity. But like, if they didn't trade for Harden, that's exactly where they were going to be. But they traded for Harden, memorable season. That's like a glimpse of like the timeline of my basketball fandom, I guess.
Oh, well, listen, I mean, coming from me, knowing you for a couple years, I had only known the Rockets story. So to understand that you were a long-suffering Knicks fan for a little bit, that was that was something else. I am better for having heard that. And I was gonna say, you're describing that Rockets team. Yeah, it was you love to have those teams that have expectations. They overachieve. They do good. I mean, you were talking about a collection of players that just have to play for each other, fight, and not play with Dwight Howard. And I mean, I'm sure that was a great experience there. I mean, for me, I always do this thing where I pick my team stays the same. The Lakers are my first diehard team, but I always have one or two teams that I would find myself attracted to over the course of NBA season. And so what I've done is I have this little weird rule for myself now where I give myself two other teams to like watch that I think I'll be interested in following through the course of the season, like how they'll work. And sometimes I stick with a whole year, sometimes out of favor with it, but those teams are there, and it's either because of who they made. I like the way they acquired a player that I think will be interesting to monitor moving forward. And so I've had a couple of them over the years, so they've included, going to kind of run through them. I've had the Spurs on there for a minute, the Nets this past touching as I've tried to cover the NBA and try to be more objective. That's always for me. Just to hey, this is the team that I'm gonna have a soft spot for. We're talking about the Lakers here, but that the teams and everything else in general for the love of basketball. I find that as start doing this to be and very much when it comes to Lakers. Like, I don't care, but that's where I get while we're still on this team kind of and this leading to another question we have coming down the line, but anyway, and we'll see if it happens. What would you call your honest memory of the Houston Rockets for you? It was on the spot. I'm sorry. It just came up.
Yeah, I mean, so I really did. I love the 2012-13 team, but they didn't do a lot. I mean, I will say this: Harden's first two games as a Rocket were like two of the most memorable games I can still vividly remember. Watching those two games. The first one was against the Pistons on the road on Halloween in 2012, and he had that 37-point, like 12 assist game, and I was like,
wow.
I knew he was good, but I was like, and everyone had the same reaction, was like, oh my God, like this guy, like he could be a superstar. And then he follows that up with like is it 45? I think it's 40. No, it's 42, I think. I can't remember exactly what he had over 40 points against the Hawks on the road, and they won that one. And I was like, oh, like this guy. And it was like he'd just been announced that he got a max extension for 5 years, and they were like, this is a risky trade. I mean, is he really going to be a superstar? But they're paying him like one, and he has those two games, and I'm like, oh my God, like this guy could be really good. But the 2014-15 team is also like a fond memory, and that was probably the last Rockets season I had watched before I started writing about basketball, because the summer of 2015 I started to write and cover the Rockets almost as like a media member. But for that 2014-15 season, I was still a fan. So it was kind of a different perspective. And that team was like, it was Dwight's second year. They had just come off the first round upset to the Trailblazers. And, it was like, are they going to be any good? What's the ceiling here? And, Dwight missed half that year. And it was just like Harden and like the ultimate collection of role players. I mean, I've got to pull up the roster because I don't think people remember how ridiculous this Rockets roster was that year. But it was just basically, it was kind of the first glimpse of like how much Harden could carry a team. And so they made the conference finals. You know, they lost to the Warriors pretty easily, but they had that memorable 3-1 comeback against the Clippers. I'd say game 6 of that series, that big comeback in the fourth quarter is one of the more memorable Rockets experiences I had as a fan. But that whole season was just like, how are they doing this? I mean, you look at this in terms of like the in terms of minutes played for this team. I will let's run down who,
Get to
who
the
led
grid.
the team in minutes played. Harden was number 1, obviously. Trevor Ariza number 2, solid 3-and-D wing. Donatas Montiunas is number 3 in minutes played that season. Number 4 is Patrick Beverley. Number 5 is 37-year-old Jason Terry. Number 6 is Corey Brewer. Number 7 is Josh Smith, who everyone, if you don't remember, the Pistons had to waive Smith because he was that bad in Detroit, and the Rockets picked him up mid-season, and he was 7th in their minutes played for the entire season.
Wow.
8th was Dwight. 9th was Terrence Jones, and just to round it out, number 10 was Joey Dorsey. Number 11, number 11 was Kostas Papanikolaou, who I mean, he had played like 2 years in the entire NBA. I mean, it's a team that's like, how on God's earth did they win 56 games and make the conference finals? But that because they did that, they were one of the most enjoyable teams to watch. And then I think like, although it was different because at this point in 2017-18, I was covering the team, it still was incredible to watch that version of the Rockets every night. I mean, they won 65 games, and it was just like pure Harden and Chris Paul dominance that was just like, like that star power like you talked about before. Like, I do love teams that kind of operate as like, just consistent ball movement. That's what got me into the game, but I do really appreciate individual star play, and that team had it. So those, in terms of the Rockets, those are probably my fondest teams to watch. And I'd say game 6 against the Clippers in 2015 was probably the fondest game. Well, at least for the fourth quarter, it was. The first 3 quarters were painful.
No, I definitely I get you on all of that. That was interesting. Shout out to Joey Dorsey, man. That was a callback. See, I missed this deep dive. Eric would always do this for those listening on the 94 podcast, man. We'd be going into the numbers, into the minutes breakdown. It was sometimes. For me, I'm gonna run through quick Laker memories. I remember almost the misery parts the best. Rooting for Smush Parker, really thinking he could be somebody out here. Never really liking Kwame Brown, but thinking they should have started the rare forward by the name of Brian Cook, who was like kind of shoot the 3. Really thought he could be a long ball weapon next to Kobe. I remember that. Obviously, 2010, the back-to-back championships. How tense I was in that game 7 watching it. How big Ron Artest came through with that 3 was amazing. And that also being a game I'll reference later, but just one of the uglier games in recent memory for myself. And then some other random points. We had the games that we overachieved in that we should have lost. You could really just pencil in any marquee game from 2014 to 2018. So matchups against the Warriors, matchups on Christmas Day, games that we were there because we're the Lakers, business being there, and we hoped that we represented. And one of those games that I really, really enjoyed, and I had to pull it up just because it's just as I thought it was. 2014 Lakers versus Heat. And again, it's the tail end of, in his Heat tenure. So you had LeBron, D Wade, Chris Bosh, the back rings. The Lakers at this point in time, we were a year removed from from the last time we were in the playoffs at that point, which was this is going to be fun team that wasn't fun at all.
With Mike D'Antoni coached during that playoff series.
It was horrible. It was yeah, that was I was
Let's
so
take a brief moment to recognize what a ridiculous season that was. I mean, they fired Mike Brown like 6 games in or something. Then people were thinking about Phil Jackson coming back, but then they go with D'Antoni. But a lot of people don't remember this. Only I would, because I've D'Antoni, which we'll get to later, is one of my favorite coaches. He couldn't actually coach the team yet because he was having knee or hip surgery. I can't remember.
I think it was that knee. You said it, yeah.
Yeah. he couldn't coach the team, so he actually they had Bernie Bickerstaff, I think, was the guy who coached for like 6 games or something, and
Yeah.
then D'Antoni finally joined the sidelines, and then of course he was with Nash again, but spoiler alert, Nash couldn't play anymore, and so D'Antoni trying to run his system with Kobe. Who obviously D'Antoni didn't work with Carmelo, even though they're different players, but still kind of the same, dominant scoring wings. Dwight Howard, who wants post-ups and no point guard. And people were like, "Oh, D'Antoni's going to turn this around," and I was like, "With what? Like they have the players, but they don't fit. They can't play, and it's trying to implement his system midway through a year is like impossible." So what a complete disastrous team and season that was, but so captivating.
It really was. I mean, you nailed it perfectly in that brief sum up, and that was thank you for that. Because I mean, 34-year-old Kobe, again, a legendary year in the midst of all that drama, averaged 27 points, 5 rebounds, and 6 assists, leading the team in minutes per game at 38 minutes a night. Then you had Dwight Howard, who wasn't fully himself yet. He was just coming off the trade and then back surgery, and he was out of sorts, and the different system was there. Pau Gasol only played 49 games for us that year. He was third in minutes played. You had Metta World Peace kind of slipping offensively, but he was still decent. He was one of the only solid pieces for us that felt like that season. Steve Nash, who I was so hyped for. I was rubbing it into all my Suns fans and everything. And I should have known. I mean, he was 38. You know what I mean? Like, he broke his leg in that one game. I think it was that preseason game, and it just that started his Lakers tenure in the wrong foot. He never quite got there. He played 50 games. And just wasn't the Nash we wanted, even when Mike D'Antoni came. You're right. And then after that, Steve Blake was a serviceable guy. Then we get to Earl Clark, the artist formerly known as Antoine Jameson, Jody Meeks, who actually came good later for us, Chris Duhon, who somehow found his way to convince people he was an okay point guard. He wasn't horrible, but
All right, D'Antoni made Duhan's career for like 3 or 4 different seasons. He has
You're right.
he has a 22 assist game. I'm pretty sure as a member of the Knicks, I remember this. I think.
Yeah. No, you nailed it. And you're right. He made it for 3 years. 3 years in New York, and then 1 year with the Lakers. He made it that. He was on the map as a point guard in this league, and it's all thanks to Mike D'Antoni. And you're right. The playoffs came, and it was a wreck. I mean, we're playing Steve Blake, Chris Duhon starters, Andrew Gowdlock and Darius Morris minutes for us. Steve Nash was in 2 of the but he was already at that point at the end of the line. Dwight Howard played and had some flameouts there. It was a mess. And yeah, you nailed it.
I just got to interrupt you for 1 second because I just Googled Duhan 22 assists, and just to find the exact game of when it happened, I'll tell you when this happened. November 29th, 2008. It was during D'Antoni's first season as Knicks head coach. The Knicks were playing the Warriors, who, again, if people don't remember, were atrocious that year.
Yep.
It was so the Knicks won 138 to 125. Let me run through. This is a very incredible Knicks box score here, by the way. D'Antoni in late November is already only playing 7 people in the rotation, which, by the way, is incredible. Duhan played 45 minutes in a regulation game, okay? He had 12 points, the 22 assists, like we mentioned. Then, one of my favorite players of all time, and really one of the players that really carried me through those terrible Knicks teams, was David Lee, who, in this game, did 37 points and 21 rebounds. Al Harrington had 36 points and 12 rebounds. And then you've got the collection of Quentin Richardson, Wilson Chandler, Tim Thomas. Just really a spectacular box score from November 29th of 2008. But there you go.
Those are some gaudy numbers. I appreciate you sharing that because it was like everyone was there getting 2K ratings up on that game. Oh man, yeah, those were the times. And so, I mean, bringing it back to the Lakers on that one with how they ended 2013, 2014, we were like, oh, well, no, let me go. I was delusional, and I thought a max free agent. That was the tenure were chasing everyone from LeBron James to Greg Monroe, um, swinging and missing on everyone. I think 2014, that was the year of Carmelo Anthony, if I remember correctly. And I don't know why we thought we were going to get him. We ended up not. We had to settle for Kendall Marshall and Wesley Johnson. But we went to that Christmas game, and we were already 16-27. And I was like, if you squint long enough, you could think we're 500, which nobody was thinking that except myself. But yeah, the Lakers were, Christmas game against the Heat, and the Heat were 31-12, and we thought, oh no, this wasn't the Christmas one. This was the one I'm referencing right now was when we lost by 7, which I considered a victory. But the one that we lost in the Christmas time was a game that as a Lakers fan, I sat and looked and went, oh, this is going to be horrible because we're trash. The Heat at the time were 22-6, and we were 13-16, which was already better than we thought that we would be. And instead, we came to play. I mean, first off, I'm just going to run through. Sean Williams was our starting power forward, all right? Our starting lineup for the Miami Heat first, just to kind of get a sense of the significance here. You already know, Mario Chalmers, Dwayne Wade, LeBron James, Shane Battier, Chris Bosh. Matching up alongside of them, Jordan Farmar on his second round of duty for the Lakers, Jody Meeks, Wesley Johnson, who'd already flamed out from both the Timberwolves and the Suns at this point. Sean Williams, who he played with the Knicks. He might have had a run.
I remember Sean Williams.
There you go. And then Pau Gasol, who was in the first of 2 years where he's like, why am I here? And then fortunately Chicago came. And then off the bench, Nick Young, Xavier Henry, Gordon Hill, Ryan Kelly, and Steve Blake, Chris Kaman, Ken Marsh, and Robert Sacre were all injured or did not play. And we came in that game, and we were hanging around because people that we weren't expecting to wake up and make shots were doing just that. Jody Meeks knocked down 4 threes. Wesley Johnson knocked down 4 threes. But the game who came to play was Swag P, who, looking at the stat line, he only had 20 points, knocked down 4 threes, had 2 rebounds and 1 assist. But looking at that game, I thought he had 35. He was taking shots to LeBron. He was taking the same shot, no conscience type of shots that we all know Nick Young to make or take, not make really, but to take. And they were going in the third quarter alone. He only played 5 minutes in the third quarter, had 12 points, 4 or 5 from the field, 2 or 2 from 3. Single-handedly, it felt like keeping the Lakers in that game because we were struggling. That's kind of the name of that season. But definitely in points, especially without Kobe, to find a guy to play through offensively, it felt like. And we lost by 6, 101-95. But that was one of my favorite memories concerning my team where I went, oh yeah, this team I think I'm gonna like. And did I? No. But I remember deluding myself into thinking that I would. But while we're talking about that, I think it's a natural transition talking about favorite moments. What was your favorite players? We talked about the Rockets. You mentioned some of those role players. Let's get a read on. Dig deep, Eric. Let's see some of these guys.
Hold on. Before you get to players, I have to mention one of my last favorite teams pretty much of all time is the 2014-15 Atlanta Hawks. This was a team. It was almost like a variation of D'Antoni's system. A little bit more deliberate, not as much focused on being the fastest team in the league, but so much ball movement. Just such a selfless team overall. They obviously didn't really have a superstar. They had that was the year they had their entire starting 5, I think, as all-stars, or they had 4 all-stars. But they didn't have a superstar you would consider, and they still won 60 games. They were good on both ends of the floor. That had a very modern style of play with a good amount of 3-pointers. They had a little bit of variation. Al Horford, Paul Millsap in the post sometimes, but just such an out of nowhere team that from afar, obviously I didn't watch all of their games that year, but from afar you could just appreciate the way they play and just root for them because they're so selfless. That was, again, one of my favorite teams to watch. But yeah, players. I mentioned some of them before, but it's really interesting. I think my whole basketball fandom is so weird because I got into the game because I love the offensive styles and fast-paced 3-pointers, ball movement, etc. And yet a lot of my favorite players are actually underrated guys that mainly are defensive players. It's the opposite of the team styles that I like. But Patrick Beverley, I think, is probably in my top 3 of favorite players ever. For those who don't know, For those who don't know, he was actually the inspiration for how I named the podcast that Corbin and I used to do. It used to be called the 94 Feet Report. And Patrick Beverley, when he broke out into the league, which happened during that 2012-2013 Rocket season, he called himself Mr. 94 Feet. And so when I was thinking of starting a podcast, I was like, oh my God, 94 feet. Let's just do a podcast name off that. Hence, you get the 94 Feet Report. So credit to Patrick Beverley for helping my career.
There it is.
But Omer Ashik, like I mentioned, it was just such a you would be shocked if he ever made a layup. Like the way whenever he went up for a layup, you would be shocked if it went in. But this guy, he always looked like he was out of breath. He couldn't keep up, but he was just like always a rebounding machine. Didn't block a lot of shots, but like he was that classic guy that the Rockets identified as super underrated by the advanced stats, because he was a guy, for 2 or 3 years with the Bulls during the Tom Thibodeau era, was, kind of a fringe bench player who'd play like, 5, 10, 15 minutes a night. But the advanced numbers always said that he was having a big impact in those minutes. So what the Rockets did was they signed him to the same contract they signed Lin to, which was the 3 years, $25 million, where it's the first 2 years were like $6 million each, and then the final year was like $14 million or whatever, the poison pill. And what he did was the 2012-2013 season, he becomes a starter, plays 30 minutes a game, averages a double-double, and it's just like a huge, like almost out of nowhere impact player defensively for them. And it was a big reason why they were able to make the playoffs, honestly, besides obviously Harden carrying them. So had a big love for him. Just like he knew what he could do. He was one of those guys who didn't want to overstep his talents, which I think is something very unique in the NBA. And, I can appreciate that. Other guys like PJ Tucker are on that list. And I think, I do obviously have a soft spot for elite creators. Obviously, becoming, falling in love with the Suns teams when I started watching the sport. Steve Nash is one of my favorite players ever. And in that similar vein, like James Harden became, one of my favorite players, just because, the scoring was one thing, but the passing was another thing. I just love really elite passing. So they're two of the, greatest passes of all time, I think. Other guys, it's gonna get weird and random here, but let's just have
That's my list, man. Let's do it.
I always had a really soft spot for Dwight. I always thought he was underrated, and when I was growing up, when he was in his prime, I just naturally gravitated to his personality because it was such a fun personality that made it really easy to connect to him, which you didn't really get because all the other stars were like stone cold kind of assassin personalities, and here's Dwight smiling and talking about eating 2 pounds of candy a day, like such a relatable person. So I always had a
relatable
in that sense, not being 7 feet tall, being monstrous athletically, but
of course.
I always had a soft spot for him. Joakim Noah, again, kind of like Omer Ashik, but like more talent offensively. But again, a guy who really didn't want to do more than he could do, which I appreciated. David Lee, like I mentioned before. Boris Diaw was one of those guys who, when he joined the Suns towards the end of D'Antoni's tenure as coach there, I just fell in love with like his just such an unorthodox game. He was like a big man, but kind of in those days was kind of able. I mean, with the Suns, because D'Antoni I think was ahead of his time. He was playing Diaw at power forward and center, but during those years prior, he was like playing small forward, which is like kind of weird. But I'm a sucker for playmaking big men. So Noah, Boris Diaw, Nikola Jokic is great to watch. Marc Gasol, another reason why I love Marc Gasol is his passing. Sean Marion, another reason. I mean, Sean Marion was more because he was just a do-it-all player, really great defensively, but also, a lot of playmaking from at that time was a front court position. Interestingly enough, when I was a Knicks fan, Landry Fields became one of my favorite role players ever in his first 2 years because this was a guy who was a second-round pick and was like, hitting threes. He could handle the ball a little bit, gave a lot of effort defensively. Of course, his career, just fell off a cliff once, he went to Toronto and then the career was over. But for those 2 years, he was one of my favorites. And then some other guys, I love like floor spacing guys like Ryan Anderson, Jared Dudley, because I think Jared Dudley has a great personality. And I've actually been more of a fan of Jared Dudley like over the past 3 to 4 years than I was when he was in his prime because of his social media presence and like the Nets Sixers playoff series where he was like, trash talking and going at the Sixers, even though the Nets were a huge underdog. So those are just some of my random favorite players of all. It's such a weird list, but I do tend to like guys who are like underrated defensive-minded players, which is completely in contrast to the types of teams that I like.
I like that. No, I mean, it was interesting. Like you said, you had a mix of like uh, um unsung heroes, some good solid pieces, players who kind of fit your personal style. That was good. Mine is a crazy. You said yours was weird. I already started with Latrell Sprewell. I can dig back to some older players I've looked at. Or an older player I looked at and liked, partially because I feel like my game kind of is more like his as far as playing, and partially just because I liked his play. Mark Aguirre,
Mhm.
yeah, he was someone I liked growing up. Like I said, when you had Spreewell, I mean, him and his family he had to feed. You were good, but it went up to it went up from there to Monte Ellis, who I
Oh
was
boy,
convinced.
that
I
is
was
a name.
convinced. Yep. In fact, I have my fantasy basketball team's called Montes and uh instead of Dante. So I was all up in there. Yeah, I was all over Monte Ellis right up until he went to Indiana and disappeared forever. And then someone who bridged the gap between that and my latest side was Be Easy Michael Beasley. Oh my goodness. Michael Beasley was like, again, everyone I bank on being stars just end up not being that. But I thought Michael Beasley was gonna be it, man. I was really excited for him. You know, played in Miami, went to Phoenix. Phoenix is kind of where he lost me as far as like having someone who I was convinced would be the next great NBA talent. He was a great talent, but like we're talking, I was thinking top 5 one day, which just shows you how delusional I was. When he went to
You were, you
Phoenix,
were
and
you were certainly not alone on that though.
oh, okay, well, see, I appreciate that because I'm gonna take him. He's gonna be great. Went to Phoenix. He had a chance to have a starring role, and then he averages 10 points a game in that 2013 year. That was a lost year for Phoenix. And after that, I was like, okay. You're kind of just stay in your role. You can kind of get. And then he went to China, Miami, back to China, back to Miami. You know, just some weird stuff there. They played for my Lakers. It just so happened to be last year. I wish he played with LeBron this year. I was like, oh wow, he'll be on my favorite team, and he'll be with one of the greatest of all time. So surely Michael Beasley would catch a break, and it just how happens to be one of the more dysfunctional teams of LeBron's career, and just another lost year. But that was another player. Derek Williams, if you remember him, was a guy I liked. U of A, went with Minnesota, and then I think he was with the Kings, and he played with the Cavs a year, and I think the Knicks too. He was another guy I thought would be really, really good. I like these tweeners who don't really particularly adopt the three-point shot, but have some offensive versatility, but never quite take over in that dominant way that I expected them to. That's kind of my type there.
Yeah, you certainly do have a type.
Yeah, they're the ones people are like, what? But that, and then lately, it started with the 2017 season that really just took me away. Once Kevin Durant left, I really followed him. You already know who I'm going with on this one. Russell Westbrook, man. Uh, I was in his corner all of 2017. I've been on it ever since, even as I had acknowledged, okay, maybe he's not exactly what I thought he was, but I always thought he got a bad rap. Um, Again, these irrational confidence guys are my heroes, probably because it's how I play, and that's me, and it kind of identifies with who I am. And I've just been all over them. So that's kind of like the all-star knucklehead team, I guess you could say. But well, I don't mean to say in a negative way, because Russell Westbrook walks the beat of his own drum, but he's a good guy. But like in general, just these all over the place guys. They're my people. I love them. I guess you gotta throw Nick Young in there. I always was on the Wesley Johnson train until I really wasn't. Once he got crossed over by James Harden, he was dead to me. I'm sorry. I couldn't have that guy as any one of my favorite player lists after that. But yeah, that was. You have any other off the bench guys? You kind of covered your team. I think that was all of mine. Because I have so much love for those guys that lately I've adopted both Terry Rozier and Devontae Graham. At first, I was like, I have to choose between the two, and then I was like, well, why not both? So they're on my list too.
Dude, I am a big Devontae Graham fan. A couple of others I'll name. I mean, he probably wouldn't make like if I had to make like a top 10 list, he probably wouldn't make it. But Chris Paul would be right as an honorable mention. Just the way he approached every game, he brought it on both ends. Just that will to win, I really enjoyed, and I really did enjoy his game. Just like how he knew what his spots were and he was going to get there. And then in terms of like weird role players, I'll put uh, Carlos Delfino on that list
Oh,
because
wow.
because he was one of the cast of characters for the Rockets in 2012, 2013, and he just came in there and was like perfect for him. It was towards the end of his career. I think it was the last year he played in the NBA actually. And it was perfect for him because they wanted to bomb the threes, not as much as they do now. Back then, interestingly enough, another reason I love that team, and I actually went back the other day and watched some of the games from that season, is that Harden played a completely different style. Back then he was actually like, he would use the pick and roll to kind of step into a mid-range jumper. His step backs would be in the mid-range, still from 3 too, but not like today. But Delfino was one of those role players. So was Francisco Garcia, but he, just such a tenacious defender. But Delfino in the 2013 playoffs, you can YouTube this if you forget. He had a poster dunk on Kevin Durant. I think it was
Oh,
game 4, I want to say. It was just so incredible. Like, I couldn't believe he dunked. But, just that 3-point bomber had a pretty fun personality on the court. So I'll throw him on the list. But I think that's pretty much everyone that would, like, come to mind, I guess.
there you go. That's solid. I mean, again, you have a thought out way. I like that you dig up these like bench guys that we're like, oh yeah, that guy. Oh yeah, that guy. Because I forgot myself some Francisco Garcia. I remember him on the Kings with Kevin Martin. He's another
Yeah.
honorable mention for my team. That was good. All right, so we got the players. We talked about favorite teams, but I guess I want to throw a little wrinkle in here. Knowing that you have your teams in the NBA like the back of the hand here, what is your favorite like? Okay, let's year team. So like for me, I really enjoy it as far as like an overachieving team. I want to say the 20. I like. Okay, no. Here's where I'm gonna go. The 2015 Mavericks. I loved that team. I liked them before they made the Rondo trade, especially. But when they had, I think they had like one of the best offenses at one point, and it was Jameer Nelson, Monte Ellis. Again, he's a hero. You had Sean Marion. You had Chandler Parsons. And then it was Jameer Nelson, Monte Ellis, Chandler Parsons, Dirk, of course, and then Tyson Chandler was back with his second go around for the Mavs. And they were so fun, and they were bombing threes, and I love the way they play. And then they made the trade where they basically swapped out Nelson and Crowder for oh my goodness, Rajon Rondo, which I didn't like as much, but that was one of my favorite iterations, like a team that I enjoyed, like a one-hit wonder kind of team. And then another team was and this again, I love dysfunction. This is my life. The 2016 Chicago Bulls with the 3 alphas.
Oh my God, that is reaching peak dysfunction levels right there.
Oh, I loved it, man. Did you have like a one team? This is like a segue to our next thing. But did you have like a one team kind of like iteration that you already mentioned the 2013 Rockets? Does that hold peak for you, or is there another team? And this could be anyone that you're like, wow, for 1 year you mentioned the Hawks. Okay, like not your favorite, but one that you're like, I kind of like that team too.
I think I'd probably go with that Hawks team. Just because I just love so much about them, and obviously they were winning a lot, and they were completely. I mean, I think they were overachieving given like the actual talent. To win 60 games without like a superstar is really hard to do. And they did make the conference finals, even though they got swept. But like that's probably the team I'd pick where it was like one season, it was like a blip where I was like, oh my God, like I really love this Hawks team, and like if I can make the time to watch their games, like I will. And I think we'll probably get to this later, but one of the best games that they had that year, and that the entire league had that year, was when they played the Warriors. When both teams, they were 1-2 in terms of record, playing in Atlanta, and the Hawks won. It was like one of my favorite games like ever, because it was a random like regular season like Thursday or Friday or something. I don't even think it was on national TV. It was one of those games where like you just felt you were being rewarded if you were like an NBA nerd. Like you just like you had League Pass, you were gonna watch it anyways, but like it was like an absurdly high execution game. But that team, I think I'd go with that Hawks team as like that one season where you just kind of get like captivated by a completely different and random team.
No, I love that. That's true. I remember watching them with like in awe of, wow, this is amazing. I almost the same with like a mix of awe and disgust with that 2016 Bulls team that I referenced. But I have to mention, I'm not going to convince you right now, but if Rajon Rondo hadn't broken his thumb, I do think the Bulls sweep the Celtics. But we're gonna move on. We're not even gonna let you refute that one. We're gonna go on to we're gonna go on to favorite coaches here. I know you referenced Mike D'Antoni, but if you want to dig in more on him, what are your favorite coaches just in your NBA watching lifetime?
Yeah, D'Antoni is number one for sure. I mean, when you are coaching the team that really got me to fall in love with the sport. I mean, you're going to be number one on my list. He also has a really good personality, a fun guy, and just seems like a really easy to root for. And of course, I think his style of play is I think you can win with it. I just think that he's had some pretty bad breaks in his career. I mean, obviously the Warriors took a lot of his principles and they dominated the league, with variations of it. But he's definitely number one. A couple other guys that have made the list over the past couple of years. I'm going to put Mike Budenholzer on her because, again, when you coach, one of my favorite teams like of all time, like that 14-15 Hawks team, you're going to make the list. I mean, I just think that his emphasis on a modern shot chart, a lot of threes, but I think his willingness to try new strategies. And I think you've seen this a lot with his second tenure now with the Bucks is, that their defensive strategy of they actually give up a lot of threes, but that's their strategy. It's part of it. They're giving up the wrong threes to the right shooters, basically. How they started doing their defensive scheme of guarding Harden on his side. I think they were the first team to really actually started doing that. I just love his ability to kind of take risks. I think that's a really, key part of being a really good coach in the NBA. I think all of the coaches that have been great have, done something unique or have taken a risk from time to time. Rick Carlisle makes this list because, he always gets great buy-in from his guys. I love the systems that he's been running offensively. You mentioned that team in 2015 was having the best offensive season. Now, before the season got suspended, the Mavericks had like one of the all-time great offenses. I love Carlisle because, he's done a lot of multi-guard lineups, which have been kind of unique. But he's had so many guards on his roster, and this was a lot of the time. This was when the Mavs were bad, but that gave him more room to experiment, which I kind of liked. He was just like, you know what? If we're gonna suck, like I'm gonna experiment the hell out of this roster, and he did that. So I think that's really cool. But he makes a list. Quinn Snyder's in the same way almost, where it's like I just really like his approach to the game, his style of play, the buy-in he gets from his players. A name I'll mention, I wasn't actually around for this guy's, coaching career, but Doug Moe makes my list of favorite coaches because I obviously have gone back and read and watched videos about his coaching tenure, mainly with the Nuggets in the 1980s is when he kind of had that peak. But if you just do research on like the offensive system that he, emphasized and practiced was basically they were like running and gunning, the fastest pace in the league, but they had no set plays. Just all like, you hold the ball for 1 or 2 seconds, you pass, you cut. When you make the pass, you cut, under the rim around to the 3-point line, even though no one took 3-pointers back then. Like it was just like pass, cut, obviously they had stars like Alex English, Fat Lever, Kiki Vandeweghe, who could finish the plays with shots, but like just like so many, it was just ball movement. It's almost like a precursor to the beautiful game Spurs that just like kept the ball moving. And it's kind of frustrating because, you stumble upon what he did in the 80s and you can only wonder like what his offense would have been like in today's NBA with the modern spacing and all the 3-pointers. But back then, you'd be surprised if a team took more than like 5 threes in an entire game. So, his offensive system, I think is really actually pretty revolutionary. And I think, when people talk about the kind of the revolutionary coaches in the NBA history, I feel like Doug Moe's name gets left off the list a little bit too much, where it's like Doug Moe and D'Antoni did a lot of it, but like, there's so many coaches that have done so. Rick Adelman has done a lot of stuff great offensively. But I think Doug Moe is one of those underrated guys. Again, I really can't have him at the top of the list because I wasn't around when he was actually coaching, but just going back and learning about kind of what he did, I've kind of gained an appreciation for him.
No, I get you. That was a very solid group, and Doug Moe especially that deep dive you just did, or kind of describing a style of play. I know he had a quote. I can't even remember it now, but he was basically talking about like positions. I want to running. No, that was West. Oops, got the coaches mixed up. No, that was Paul. No, that was man. I'm getting all my coaches messed up. Paul Westhead. That's who it was. Anyway, Doug Moe, though, I do remember him as far as like watching classic games, and that run and gun Nugget style was certainly something to behold. Okay, so again, going with the coaches of mine, or my own favorite coaches, some that are standard, I guess, as a Lakers fan that you have to put up there. So Phil Jackson is automatically there. Pat Riley is right there as well. They kind of have to be. I give extra points to coach failures. Like if I like you as a coach, but you messed up. For example, Phil Jackson's assistant, he wasn't actually coaching at this point, but his assistant on the triangle in the Pace and Space NBA. Well, well, the irony will never be lost on me, and I think it's hilarious. Pat Riley, I think I give him extra credit just for his versatility coaching. That was kind of rated, taking a fast-paced Showtime Lakers team and then going basically slow, grounded out, defensive minded with both the New York Knicks and the Miami Heat. And I actually blame him for, we're going to talk about this later, but just some of the worst NBA basketball I had to witness in my lifetime. With 90s Knicks Heat games that ended in the 70s. Oh my gosh. I mean, and him having been on the first team to really set the tone there and then transferred over to the next team. Yeah, boo on him. You mentioned Mike D'Antoni. I may not have been a fan of him as a coach, primarily because of how our Lakers tenure worked out, but I do appreciate his candor and his locker room quotes. I think he's one of the more funnier coaches for sure. And he's a big part of the 7 Seconds or Less book written by Jack McCallum. And that was an amazing book. All over that. Doc Rivers got me. He didn't used to have me, but I see him, what he's done more with less with some Clippers teams before he ended up getting both Kawhi and Paul George really impressed me. Working out with the Lob City Clippers and the team really unlikable in my opinion, but making them kind of come together. I think that he's severely underrated just for what he gets out of teams and kind of overachieve. Even what he did with that early 2011 Magic teams I had to throw out there. Greg Popovich is up there just because I love grumpy old man yells at clouds, but he's also like really kind of funny. And his teams have always been kind of successful, and you got to give credit to that. And then my personal favorite, another one that I didn't really get to watch too much in my lifetime, but I did catch one epic series. Don Nelson. Don Nelson for me. I didn't really get to see Run TMC, wasn't around then, but I did see the We Believe Warriors, and you mentioned 2008 being one of the worst Warriors teams of all time, and but 2007, that's how quick has it fallen. 2007 they felt so great, in 2008 they were so trash, but you had Don Nelson in general revolutionized it the way not only pace and space and spreading the floor, but back then to he would have, he'd play small ball lineups, have the center way out in the 3-point line, not because they could even shoot threes, which I thought was interesting, but just because you had those old 3 in the key rules and the defensive rules, so that you had to have the defender at least respect the guy out there. And by at least pulling him out close enough that you don't get called for that penalty, you open up the lane enough for you to have easy, wide open lanes to the basket. I thought it was crazy how quick he was at that. And then, like you said, like later on, playing in that We Believe series against the Mavericks, playing Al Harrington, Steven Jackson, kind of going small, Monte Ellis, Baron Davis, and playing Jason Richardson in small forward, literally running and gunning in threes. And I mean, the legendary Don Nelson is crazy, but for those types of plays, I mean, he has Nelly Ball named after him, really putting on the point forward role with first Marcus Johnson and then others, just kind of having be the thing where you can just kind of have a forward bring up the ball and initiate offense. I thought was really crazy and really fun. And even now you can look at how his fingerprints are all over the NBA just by different rules that he's had, and different ways that he was able to change the game. First, even using Manute Bol for 3-pointers. I think he jacked up. He gave Manute Bol in the 80s the green light to shoot threes, and Manute Bol jacked up like 100 of them. Only made 20, but like.
But one of the most incredible jump shots of all time, too. It's like he was like pushing it with his hands without even trying to shoot a basketball.
Exactly. It was insane. It was like a slingshot. It was funny. I think there's that. Made the rounds, but if anyone looks up Manute Bol's 6 threes, I think he made 6 threes against the 70s, the Suns. And Charles Barkley's reaction as he, like slung the ball up over his head and it just into the rim. It was amazing. But yeah, I really think even now you see Giannis and LeBron and others who can Luka, who aren't exactly point guards but are primary offensive initiators from the next spot. I think you chalk up a lot of it to Don Nelson, so he has to be my favorite. But yeah, that was interesting. Coach Memory Lane. I hadn't even thought about that one there. But all right, so we're moving on to the next segment. We got a lot. Wow. See, this is what I always miss too while we're here, because this is part podcast, part trip down memory lane for the viewers here. We used to go in depth. We'd be going long on these pods, and here we are already at almost an hour. It's kind of crazy, but we talked about favorite teams, favorite players and coaches. I had to put a little negative Nancy there. What team or teams did you just hate growing up, or even now? I mean, like, I guess I could say that. Yeah. What teams do you look at and you're like, oh my goodness, here they are?
Hate. Okay, hate is a strong word for me.
Oh,
There's definitely
yeah.
like teams that like I didn't like them. Let's put it this way. Like the Warriors, right? The Warriors when they broke out, like 2012, 2013, 2014, and 2014-15 was the breakout season, obviously. But those Warriors were like really fun to root for. Because they were just getting on, establishing themselves on the scenes. They had a pretty good style of play, especially when Kerr took over. But basically, once you get past 14, 15, I found them really hard to root for because they were winning a lot, obviously. Then they got KD, and then and this ties into like just the overarching thing is like those 2017, 2018 kind of seasons. It was just I was so sick of seeing the same finals matchup that it made me like not like the teams. Like I just was so sick of them winning, and I was like, I don't really feel as excited for the season because I know I was going to be in the finals, and we had that for a couple of years, and that kind of dampened things, I think, and I think you saw that this past season, even though unfortunately, it might be over with the suspension, but people were so excited for this year because there was no like clear cut, like, oh yeah, those two teams are definitely going to be in the finals. Like that was kind of the excitement that was lost for a couple of years because of basically the Warriors' dominance, but also because of the Cavs and the weak East. But those Warriors teams, I think, they got KD and, it was just, the cockiness. I think it was hard to root for them after the 14-15 season.
Yeah.
I'd say a team that really pushed my love, like really test my love for the game of basketball was the 15-16 Rockets because this was a team where it's like how some teams like there's dysfunction but they hide it from the court. Like this was a team that was like just yelling at each other on the court during the games. It was just a complete disaster. I mean, they made the conference finals in 15. They make the Ty Lawson trade, which everyone was like, yeah, this is great. It's going to give James Harden another ball handler. He can play off the ball. Of course, Lawson was never the same from the previous years with the Nuggets, where he was putting up like all-star numbers almost. And then Dwight and Harden got into it. They fired McHale 11 games into a season, even though they made the conference finals literally like 7 months ago.
That still bugs you.
Just it was.
I
I
can
mean,
tell.
and the funniest thing is that McHale. I didn't even think McHale was a good coach. Like, but just like the so quick, how quick it was to kind of have the scapegoat. And what's funny is that JB Bickerstaff at the time was like a highly touted assistant. And I got excited when they promoted him. I was like, oh, I've heard so much about this guy. Like he's supposed to be the next great head coach. And of course, he's gone on to do, pretty much nothing as a coach. But that team, the chemistry issues, they didn't deserve to make it, but they made the playoffs. And of course, they were the 8-1 matchup against the Warriors. They actually won a game in that series, out of sheer, probably the Warriors not paying attention and Curry getting hurt. But that team was like, just paying attention to it up close was one of those teams where it's like, oh my God, like this really tests your love for the game of basketball, having to watch every game for that team. Because I was actually covering them and writing about them at the time, which was just disastrous. But that's a team that's like, I was kind of like rooting for them, but also like, God, I couldn't stand them at the same time, which is so unique. But that's definitely a team that I really didn't like. And, being a fan of the 7 Seconds or Less Suns, I have to kind of be disappointed and annoyed at the Spurs for eliminating them, in 3 different years. The only reason I can't really say I hated them is because I actually had so much respect and kind of enjoyment for their system and Popovich. But like 2007 was really frustrating for me because at that point I had really established myself as like, you know what, I'm a Knicks fan, but the Suns are my B team, and they were playing the Spurs in the playoffs. And of course, the hoary hip check on Steve Nash and Boris Diaw and Stoudemire getting suspended because they left the bench. Like that was one of those moments for me. Like I didn't realize the significance of it in the grand scheme of things. Because a lot of people say now if that didn't happen, the Suns might have like made the finals that year because they were the best team and they would have had an advantage in the series because they dropped Game 6. No, they dropped Game 5. Sorry, because it happened in Game 4. But that was one of those moments where in the moment I was like so frustrated and like annoyed and like yelling at the TV. But again, I can't say I just had so much respect and enjoyment for like the way the Spurs play that they didn't hate me. I didn't hate them, but like just the fact that they kept eliminating my favorite team was like so disappointing for me.
I feel you on that. I feel bad that I opened up some unhappy feelings there. But you know what? I had to do it for the sake of the pod. You know, that's what we do these now. Especially when you talk about the team you like and just the whole like dysfunction and dissolving of said team. Um, I have pretty much the same. I mean, I already mentioned that this is gonna be fun. Not at all, Lakers. I didn't like, but I have a weird thing about super teams. So I didn't like I didn't like Heat at all when they first started. But after they, it's like I feel after this team loses, then I'm okay with them because you've been humbled, in my opinion. So
Yeah.
like when the Heat started, I was not a fan of them at all. Then you get beat by the Mavericks, who I liked even less. I almost liked less than them because how they steamrolled past my Lakers. But when they beat the Heat, I went, okay, you know what? That's fine. I'll accept it because the Heat, they needed, you can't just put a team together and microwave that and think that you have a championship team, right? It didn't even matter that Heat won the next two because I felt that LeBron had learned a lesson, quote unquote. So I was okay with that. The Warriors, the same thing. Like, if they had had their iteration, they were winning everything. It was all too easy for them. Yeah, my Lakers were playing them well. So on an individual note, I guess I was okay with it because as long as my team did reasonably well against them, like I knew they were the better team. But 2016 happened. They won those 73 games. I had a fiery passion. I wanted them to lose, especially when I was on the LeBron James train. And that's one comeback. In fact, I own like all three. I have like the games of them, like the wins. I'm all over. Just I will watch again and again and again. Just the comeback of 3-1, and we're remembering how that loss was. And to make it even sweeter, I was in California on Game 7 at a random
Oh, wow.
Buffalo Wild Wings. Yep. And I was rooting. This is how funny and crazy I am. I was rooting for the Cavs while wearing a Lakers jersey in a California Buffalo Wild Wings. And like the waiter couldn't have been like when I came in, I cheered for I think it was a J.R. Smith 3. And I couldn't have been like immediately. It was almost like they knew that I wasn't rooting for the Warriors. Well, I guess you could when I'm the only one cheering in a loud room, but they put me immediately in the center of the Buffalo Wild Wings. And so I'm sitting there cheering for the Cavs, and for each shot the Warriors make, everyone's like, yeah, like all around me. I'm like, guys, okay, I get it. Like, jeez. It was amazing, and for them to win and have silence on all their faces. I got out real quick, but it doesn't matter how fast I left. I was just hyped at the fact that it was done. But then the Warriors had to mess around and get Kevin Durant, and then they sparked my fiery anger against them all over again. So that happened. And then when they lost to the Raptors, I think it softened for me then. And then I jumped against not liking the Clippers, even though the Clippers don't give you anything to not like. Yeah, they're a good team. Yeah, they're really, really quickly. Yeah, Pat Beverly is Pat Beverly. But, like, they're not all of a sudden acting, oh, yeah, we're all good. Like, the ones who, Montrezl Harrell, Pat Beverly, the ones who are getting your face and loud, and they're still the same play. They were like that when they were on a less talented team. You know what I mean? So I
Yeah.
can't not like them for that. And the fact that Kawhi Leonard and Pat Beverly and Paul George got together, it was like, okay, well, I guess they're doing what every other team does. Like, there's nothing for me not to really like about them, but I find a way anyway. So, like, that's my team. But growing up, the Spurs, they would get away with such dirty stuff, Bruce Bowen especially, and then they would all do the Tim Duncan, what, me? Face. Yeah. I never liked that. That always grinded my gear. And then the Celtics, it was the classic teams, but that especially was kind of funny to think about because when that Warriors team lost, they I softened my feelings toward them, but I was so angry. And then I got angry again when they got DeMarcus Cousins. I think we were still talking about that at the time, and I was like, it is so not fair. Or something. I was on Twitter raging about that, and it turned out obviously different. But I was, as long as the super team is now my Lakers, I may have some anger, but then I can look back and kind of soften towards that.
No, yeah, I agree. There's just like I have that thing with super teams too. I think a lot of people do too, where it's just like you don't want to see I mean, it's what I said before about like the 17 and 18 finals. It's like you just don't want to see the same thing, and you don't want to know what's going to happen ahead of time. And because the Warriors were so dominant, and because the Cavs were good, but just the East was so weak at that time, just the fact that you went into those two seasons, back to back, basically knowing who was going to be in the finals, for me, it really just hurt my excitement And, I think that recently, the past year, especially this season, I've gone into with even more excitement because you don't know who's going to win. And that's, those years when I was getting into the game, it wasn't like super teams were running through the league. So that's, and then of course, the Heatles were kind of the next evolvement of super teams. So I agree with you there. I think a lot of people would agree with us in terms of like not liking super teams, at least until they're humbled, which, sometimes happens and sometimes doesn't happen.
Sure, exactly. You nailed it. That man, what that like it's weird about how emotions and such go off of that, but it really does. Like fortunes and can turn for teams on a dime, and so can fandoms or so can like favors of people. If it's like, hey, I like this team. Wait, they did what? Forget them. So
Mhm.
fun times. But okay, so now we're gonna breeze through the best games you've ever watched, and then we'll kind of stop on the worst games. But Eric, for you, we watch a lot of basketball. What's the best games that you've watched that are like, wow, I am better for having experienced that?
God, there are almost like too many. I've only written down like a couple of them that really stick out, and some of them, honestly, one of the only good things about the suspension going on right now is that not only has the NBA been showcasing like throwback games on their social media channels,
Love it.
but like just like YouTube is just such an extensive place where you can find like almost anything. So having some more time to just like look back at some of these games, and some of them are like the ones that I remember watching at the time and like trying to rewatch it again and be like, oh yeah, that was just as absurd as I remember it. And then other games that you had forgotten about or had only seen parts of, and you go back and watch them as like, oh my god, yeah, that was crazy. But I mentioned, so in terms of like a lot of them are playoff games because obviously there's just so much more drama there. But there are some regular season games that were like, oh my god. Suns Nets double overtime in 2006. The Suns won 161 to 157. Steve Nash had 42 points and 13 assists, and Jason Kidd had a 38, 14, and 14 triple double. Just an absurd game. Steve Nash had a clutch three. I want to say at the end of the first overtime that was like, oh my god, this guy's an assassin. But just like so much scoring, double overtime. It was such a great game. I mentioned that Hawks Warriors game from 2015, just such great execution from the two best teams in the league. Game 7 of the 2016 finals, I think the drama and the big plays that were made in the closing minutes really made that game like legendary. But it was just such a close game, and just so much was on the line, which I think does add to some of the games in terms of like how memorable they are. Warriors Thunder, February 2016, and Steph had that game winner from almost half court and hit 12 threes, and it was an overtime game. Just like absurd. I mean, that was one of those moments where you realize like this guy's like one of the all-time greats, like that kind of game.
Yeah.
Game 6 of the 2013 finals, obviously well known for Ray Allen's three-pointer, but just such a back and forth game that all the drama and just Chris Bosh's block at the end of the game, which is not remembered enough. I think it was just such a great defensive awareness play that me loving defense and all my defensive players could really appreciate.
Right.
Let's see what other ones. Spurs Thunder, Game 6 of the Western Conference Finals in 2014. The Spurs won in overtime to advance to the finals in OKC, and it was such tense drama because the Thunder were trying to keep their season alive at home, but the Spurs just overtime games in the playoffs are just so thrilling. Warriors Cavs Christmas Day 2016. The finals rematch, but it was the first time that KD and LeBron were going up in that rivalry. But Kyrie hit that go-ahead shot against Thompson with 3 seconds remaining. Just Christmas Day games are NBA on Christmas is so great, and that was like just one of the best ones probably ever. Couple of other playoff games from my 7 seconds or less Suns era. Game 6 of Suns Mavericks from 2005. Really, this whole series is one of like the most enjoyable series to watch. I've actually slowly watched bits and pieces of like every game from this series recently. This was that series. A lot of people, if you don't remember it, is the series basically the Mavericks' game plan was to make Steve Nash a scorer rather than a playmaker. And so let me tell you what Steve Nash did. 48 points in Game 4, 34 in Game 5, and 39 in this Game 6 overtime victory to clinch the series. I mean, they basically were like, you have to score to beat us, and Steve Nash was like, okay, I can do that too. Like such a great series, really memorable. And then the following year in 2006, I think a very, very underrated series is Suns Clippers. I mean,
Yeah.
the Suns won in 7 games. This game 5 in particular, was a double overtime victory for the Suns, 125 to 118. The game itself overall wasn't great up until the fourth quarter because the Suns were basically blowing the Clippers out. But the Clippers came back from 19 down in the fourth quarter. But the Suns pulled it out in double overtime. Really a great series. In this game specifically, Sean Marion had 36 points and 20 rebounds, which is just absurd. But again, and for people who don't remember, this was the year that the Suns didn't have Amari Stoudemire because he hurt. I think he tore his ACL. I think it was like in the fourth game of the season, in the regular season, so he was
Yeah.
out. But they still made the conference finals, and this game was one of the reasons why. So that series, like if you have time, anyone listening to this has time to go back and watch some of the games from the Suns Clippers series in 2006. Like I feel like that's like one of the most underrated, like fun series ever. It just happened to be right at the perfect timing to hook me into the sport of basketball. So yeah, those are just some that like really stuck out when I like saw this question. I was like, you know what? I remember these games. Let me Google them to make sure I'm thinking about the same thing because it has been like 15 years. But I'm a sucker for high scoring overtime games, basically.
I mean, those are the best kinds of games. I mean, I love those because one, you're going to get plenty of offense. Two, it's going to be tight if it's going to overtime and double overtime, whatever the case may be. And three, usually those games have memorable moments, players. It's not just a run of the mill game, or sometimes it is, and it just is elevated above that. So I'm right there with you. Mine are all over the place. So the first one I have was and again, you talked about the game 6 of the 2015 playoff series against the Clippers. First of all, the Rockets come back like you said, like from 3-1 down. But secondly, just watching Josh Smith and Corey Brewer play out of their minds, that was crazy.
See, I would have put that on the list if I could have best quarters I've ever watched because the first 3 quarters of that game were so like very not only were they painful being a Rockets fan, but they were just like it was like an average run of the mill blowout until the fourth quarter. In which case, again, for those who don't remember, which it wasn't that long ago, it bears repeating that Josh Smith, Corey Brewer, and a 37-year-old Jason Terry. Jason Terry, that trio alone brought the Rockets back from like 18 or 19 down to win the game. James Harden didn't play a second in the fourth quarter, and they still won.
It was insane. I'm just looking back on it now. I'm like, wow. I mean, James Harden, he went 5 for 20. It was a horrible game, like you said. And all of a sudden, Josh Smith and Corey Brewer must have thought that they were like, I don't know, Chris Mullen and I don't know, another great shooter, just randomly. Like, they were just knocking down threes. I mean, I thought Corey Brewer made more than the 2 he knocked down, but Josh Smith was not only making them, he had a pull-up one, I think. He had one over DeAndre Jordan. It was like, okay, Josh, you've always thought you were a better three-point shooter than you were, but at this moment, right now, and what's even funnier is that they needed that game. You know what I mean? That was elimination.
Oh, yeah.
They were come back from 3-1. So I had to put it there, even though you're right. The game as a whole, speaking of another game that was kind of ugly, but I enjoyed partially because of late game heroics, was another game 6 of the 2016 first round between the Charlotte Hornets and the Miami Heat. I look at that really as Dwayne Wade's last hurrah as far as like leading a team. But he knocked down 2 big quarter 3-pointers. And not a really good 3-point shooter historically, not really good at all. He only had 23 points, but that was enough to lead the Heat in this dogfight of a game. Final score was 97-90. And it's against a fun Hornets team I really liked with Frank Kaminsky and Kemba Walker, Courtney Lee, Marvin Williams, Big Al Jefferson, and Jeremy Lin. That was one that
I was going to say something about that team because that team that you mentioned I remember it, pretty vividly now. 2 things about that team. One, that really should probably be an honorable mention on my favorite teams list, or that question you asked about which team kind of like captured your attention for like basically only one season. That team was such a weird team. But they were like so good. I mean, just really well coached. And that team is one of the reasons why, and other reasons, but like I think that Steve Clifford is a really nice coach in terms of getting the most out of his players and how his schemes work. But another sad thing about that Hornets team is that it happened and this happened to other teams too, like the Trailblazers that year too, is that they had success right before the salary cap spike. So they were like, oh yeah, this team is the team to carry us for the future. And they spent all of their money on Batum and Marvin Williams and just, kind of killed their entire future. But they had that one magical year, 7-game series against the Heat, good for them.
You're right. Jeremy Lingo, which I didn't let him. He got a good offer from Brooklyn. He ended up getting in the pen year where it was a fun squad. I mean, just an interesting mix. You had, I love the uniforms. It was a good team. So that was when another one. This was the second round. No, this was first round as well. Game 3 between the Dallas Mavericks and San Antonio Spurs in 2014. A game winner, but that entire series was so fun, nip and tuck. Obviously, the Spurs were going to win the championship. They had this well-rounded team basketball concept, but for the Mavericks, I mean, they were feisty. It was Dirk, Monte Ellis, Sean Marion, Jose Calderon, Samuel Dalembert. It was the last really good playoff series. It may have been the last playoff. No, they ended up going in 2015. But it was the last really good kind of playoff series for Dirk with that Mavs era where they were really competing, and Samuel Dalembert had himself some minutes, and Monte Ellis. It was fun. It was capped off with that Vince Carter 3 in the right corner over Manu Ginobili in so narrow window where he got the shot off as Manu was still flying. He had to take it. He couldn't wait till Manu had finished landing on that kind of way, and it went around at the buzzer. And then going to 7 games, but that game was fun to me. I just watched this podcast, but the 1995 NBA Western Conference Finals, of course, NBA, between the Rockets and the Spurs, a lot of fun to be able to check that out. Robinson versus Olajuwon, and what I didn't realize is, 1, I love the way the Spurs played back then. It was definitely ahead of its time. 2, yeah, Olajuwon completely outclassed Robinson. He totally did. He could not be stopped. But looking back at it, Robinson had himself some moments, and so did Avery Johnson, who impressed me with the way he played. Those games were classic. Game 7 of the 1988 Eastern Conference Finals, if I remember that right. Larry Bird versus Dominique Wilkins, which was an exciting game and a lot of fun to be able to check that out. And that was one that it was kind of slow. Dominique was scoring throughout, and then Larry Bird didn't really get going until later on. But in that fourth quarter, that back and forth, the highlights show it just like the game was. And then lastly, I'd have to put, and this is kind of painful for me, but Game 6 of 2013 NBA Final between the Spurs and the Heat. Ray Allen with the shot. I remember going on Facebook. I think the Spurs were up. I don't really remember. I try to forget this, but I don't really remember how many points the Spurs were up. But it was winding down, and I was like, the Spurs have won the championship. I'm so proud. All the this and that to show the Heat again that it takes more than, I don't know. It was just on and on. And I put the post up, and then I went back to watch the game because it was during a timeout that I put the post up. And then Ray Allen hits the shot, goes to overtime, the Heat win. I'm so distraught that I forget that I had the post up. So it wasn't until the next day I'm getting, I didn't test my phone, you suck, you're wrong, dude, this and that. I like those apples, and replays of that shot again and again. So when I see that shot, I didn't even like the Spurs that much, but I was so invested in the Heat losing that every time I see that shot, it almost as if it was my team that got hit with that dagger. So I had to put that up there. Real quick though, I'm so thankful for your time here, Eric. But before we go out here, do you have any worst teams that you like? I just want to run through this one, or worst games that you ever watched. I want to run through this one. I have one more question, but I had to mention the Knicks Heat Eastern playoff series as an excuse to get them out there, and how much I did not like that. And I guess you use that with any early 2000 New Jersey Nets Pistons games as well. So I'm throwing them out there, but I'm throwing it to you now. What do you have there?
Oh, I'll tell you right now, the 2003 NBA Finals between the Spurs and Nets is I mean, if someone wants to get out of loving basketball, they should probably watch that series, because again, that really tests the love of the game. I mean, just that, like you said, the whole early 2000s was just it really was hard. And that's, I think, luckily I kind of got into it 2004, 2005, when there still were a lot of those teams. But I think that's a huge reason why the Suns were the not the antagonist, but kind of going rogue and doing the entire opposite of they're actually playing fun basketball. And so that's why I gravitated towards them, and a lot of people gravitated towards them too. I'd say that Well, first of all, any game from the Bobcats 7-59 season can make this list. I mean, that season, not that I really paid attention to, I wasn't a Charlotte Bobcats fan, but oh my God,
Hmm.
like you just sometimes if you want a good laugh, you could like go back at look at their schedule on ESPN for that season, just see all the red L's. Oh my God, dude. Any of those games can make this list. I say the 2018 finals overall, besides game one, were just such a slog, like not like a slog in terms of style of play, but like they were just all basically blowouts. And the Warriors swept the Cavs. Like that series really kind of dampened, the excitement because it's the finals. You want to be super excited about the matchup and the drama, and there just was none of that at all. So
Yeah.
I'd say I throw that entire series up on this question too. But like I think for me, the toughest thing is that once I watch a really bad game, I just do everything in my entire nature to block it from my memory. So I don't even usually have specific games that are so bad, but I do remember like really bad teams or like really bad eras. So like the early 2000s, I think would perfectly make this list. Now that I think about it, honestly, I don't know why this is so random, but I'd say for my favorite teams, I'm going to throw in the 2009 Orlando Magic as an honorable mention there.
Yep.
And I think I'm also going to throw Stan Van Gundy on my favorite coaches thing because it's funny because like I think between the two of us, we've hit on all like the offensive like revolutionary coaches. But Van Gundy also was kind of a guy who did a little bit more, was a little bit more ahead of his time. I think specifically, this year playing Rashard Lewis at the four next to Dwight to make sure that there are four shooters around Dwight. At that time it still wasn't a popular, strategy. And so, he also had a pretty good personality and one of the most iconic, awkward interactions between coach and player when the rumors came out that Dwight wanted him fired and
Oh
Stan is drinking
no.
the Diet Pepsi at the interview and Dwight comes and hugs him or puts his arm around him. It's a top five iconic, just so awkward. It's such an awkward moment. So, but yeah, going back to the worst games, it's just so hard to pick specific games. I just kind of like group a lot of things into like time periods. So early 2000s. I think 2017 and 18, there was a lot of great like regular season action. But in terms of like playoffs and the finals, I think it was kind of a dud. But yeah, that's what it is.
I feel that. No, you ran through some a really comprehensive list there. I have to add, if you watch any of the 2015-2016 Lakers games, we lost 65 of them. Chances are you'll find a bad one. Most of them were that year. And you're right. I mean, you want to watch those bad Bobcats teams, the bad process teams. I mean, the
Oh
process
God.
76ers had some ugly games. Oh my goodness. Yeah, there was some rough ones, but I had to throw out the Knicks and Heat and how a lot of my basketball experience was ruined by a lot of just ugly, slow games of terrible shots and arguably good defense. But I had to throw it out there. Okay, last question for you, man, Eric. Why do you love the game? If you could it's a tough one, but it's also like, I don't know, it's weird. What do you like think of that's like, you know what, this is the game for me. Like this affirms my fandom or love for this game.
I think I have to say it's just the flow of the game, the back and forth nature that you really don't get in other sports. That makes me love basketball more than those sports. I think players being forced to play both sides of the floor is a key thing. The constant action, running and transition. The back and forth. Teams playing off of each other. One, it always keeps you entertained, but two, it always can change the dynamic of a game. But then you have like little things like play calls, after timeout plays, small defensive tweaks that make a big difference that you really have to focus on that, that maybe a casual viewer wouldn't notice. I really do appreciate and pick up on those things a lot of the time. I think there's so many things, but like I think that the unique styles of play that you come across. I mean, you can get a team, for instance, that focuses on the post or the mid range, playing a team that basically focuses on threes and playing at a fast pace. Suns versus Spurs back in the day, Spurs versus Rockets to the past couple of years. And the ultimate thing, I think, like I said, the Suns really got me into the sport. Ball movement, fast pace, 3-pointers. Spacing the floor. That's kind of the strategy and style of play that I still like the most today. Shout out to the Spurs, the 2014 Spurs. Obviously they're known as the beautiful game Spurs, but just seeing what great ball movement, like the effect that great ball movement can have, one on results, but two on the like entertainment aspect of the game, is really enjoyable for me. So I really do enjoy watching teams that have great ball movement combined with, an up-tempo pace and like modern, floor spacing. I don't want great ball movement that's just going to result in like 10-second post-ups. I want like ball movement that's going to move, around the entire arc and stuff. And then finally, I mean, everyone, probably loves the drama of late game situations, buzzer beaters. It's just so hard to beat. I mean, you can get like walk-off home runs in baseball. You can get last second, touchdowns or field goals in football. But like, just like, again, that back and forth, that flow that bleeds into a buzzer beater is just so great. So I think it's just the flow and the kind of back and forth nature of the sport that keeps me entertained, and then from there diving into the nitty gritty details from a play to play basis is probably what makes me still maybe fall in love with the game and still love the game.
Man, that was such a great list right there. I appreciate that. Honestly, Rick, I just want to thank you for your time. It was good to get back.
Wait, I've got a question for you.
Let's get it.
This is going to be a bold one here, but all right. So we talked about how we came to love the game, why we still love it, favorite teams, players, coaches. But now let's look forward and let's see, are there any rule or game changes that you want to see in the future?
I forgot this one.
I've got a couple that are probably controversial, but I'm pretty passionate about them.
Okay, I've been thinking long and hard about this, and I even had to go to the NBA today, or not the NBA today, NBA 2K. Remember how they have that feature where you change the rules, or you don't have to change the rules, but when you play my GM, that was where I had to go, where where it was for that. For me, I couldn't think of. I would say, okay, one. I mean, and this is even okay. I would move the draft to after free agency, first of all.
Okay.
I think first you have the players enter free agency. I know it's not really a rule as much as like a thing, but it kind of falls in the same boat for me. Then you can kind of gear your team and draft for positions of need, and then not draft somebody come available. Another thing I would do, this always annoys me, but when the shot clock violation happens and like it's a scrum for the ball, the shot clock violation happens, the other team gets the rebound and they like blow the you have to take the ball to possession with shot clock violation first.
Yeah.
Scratch that. Like if the other team gets possession, move on. Like that's kind of where I'm at. The other, and this is weird, but I don't really know how to fix this because it's like I said, it's weird. But as far as the shot clock is concerned, I almost want to make 14 seconds, period. Like
that's a bold one.
I mean, we're talking about speeding up the game. I mean, wouldn't that be speeding up to a quick degree? But we're going bold here. These are rule changes that have to be made. And I'm thinking, okay, you talk about the running gun. How quick would teams play? And maybe this is just me on some caffeine right now. But if you have 14 seconds to advance the ball and get offense out, are we going back to the 80s with the way that players shoot now? Would it possibly be better in that way? I don't know. And then third, and this is probably more controversial, bring back hand checking.
Interesting.
Because if we're going to combat the great free-flowing, a lot of advantage has been given to the offensive player in years past, and it's made for an enjoyable product as far as watching, but it's also made defense kind of futile, especially with different advantages that the offense player has now in order to kind of, pump fake, get players to dump into them, the same type of gimme fouls that we see all over. I would like hand checking. I think that, you have guys like, especially with guys like Draymond Green, who already is a defender now. I think that would be something cool. I mean, they took that in the 2005 season, but if you're going to shorten the time clock, but then bring back hand checking, I think you kind of balance it a little bit. It's still kind of crazy, and I know it's kind of crazy, but you kind of give some advantages back to the defensive player, and I think that needs to happen even out the kind of give and take that the game of basketball evolves every couple of years or every kind of decade or so.
I'm a proponent of really bold changes, as you'll hear in a second. But the reason, the consideration for the 14-second permanent shot clock, the reason that I would be against that only is because for those teams, and there are teams obviously, and there are a lot of them that set up plays, and the extra 10 seconds would be like, I don't think you'd have enough time to bring the ball up the court and actually execute a play in 14 seconds. So then I think a lot of offenses would suffer. I mean, you'd have a more up-tempo game because you'd be forced to play that way, but I think the actual execution, especially in the half court, but even in general, you'd almost have to go back to like Doug Moe's system of just no plays and just complete freelance offense. And, that could be good, but also could be like really hard to watch because there'd be no plays to get open shots. And defenses will only have to guard for 14 seconds as opposed to 24. So that's one reason why I'd probably, be against that one. But in terms of speeding up the play, I got two things. One is I think a lot of people agree and have called for this, but those BS Euro fouls that players take to stop transition opportunities, like a missed shot, a team is clearly about to have like a 4-on-3, 5-on-3 advantage, and a guy just grabs the player running in transition.
The
Jokic foul. There needs to be a harsher punishment for that. There needs to be like two free throws and the ball for the team that got fouled.
Wow.
Because I mean, if you want transition is one of the most exciting aspects of the game. I mean, that's where you get a lot of the, crazy dunks or just great, high speed action. And right now the league is just letting players and teams just like cut down on those highlights basically. So that's one thing. Number two, I'm really starting to think I haven't really finalized if I actually like this idea, but I'm starting to think about having one free throw for every shooting foul. So if you're fouled inside the arc, you take one free throw and it's worth 2 points. And if you're fouled behind the arc, you take one free throw and it's worth 3 points. Now, on the other hand, I think something has to happen with free throws, especially beyond the arc. I feel like if you get fouled behind the arc, you can either just make it 2 free throws if you want to keep the rule the same way. But if you're going to go with this one free throw for everything rule, it does, you'll have more actual game flow and less stoppage at the free throw line. I do get the concern of like people won't have enough time to like rest up and catch their breath, which maybe you have to add in like an additional like TV timeout or something. But I do think maybe having less free throws during the actual game might make for a more enjoyable experience. Another one, I actually did this in 2K. I have a My League going right now, and I set up this rule: playoff seeding being 1 through 16, regardless of conference. I like that. That's something I'm here for. I know you obviously would have to alter the schedule to have more travel days, since you'll probably get some West versus East matchups like in the first round. And I do get the argument that you'd lose out on those like conference rivalries. But if you really think about it, at this point in today's NBA, are there really any of those rivalries that you're kind of scared of missing, in the future? I mean, those legendary rivalries haven't really been either those teams haven't been meeting in the playoffs for several years, or the teams haven't been good, or they just, there really isn't as much of an emphasis on rivalries anymore. And I feel like I'd rather focus on having the two best teams make the finals. But this all pales in comparison to my ultimate rule change that I want to see. I want a 4-point line in the NBA.
Oh my goodness. Now that would definitely kind of impact some pace of play for sure. Or not pace of play, but pace of the game as far as like shots going up and stuff. That's something else. You gotta explain this more.
Yeah, listen, I've heard all about it. Oh no, we're not. It's too much of a joke. Whatever. I must remind people that when the 3-point line was introduced in 1979 and 1980, people also referred to it as a joke that would never be used. So I don't want to hear that whole "it's a joke" thing for that argument. Number two,
True.
Players. I've got prepared for this. Players that can already hit from that deep. It's a very, very short list. Steph, Damian Lillard, maybe Harden would attempt some. There are not that many players that can hit from that deep anyways. Those players will just continue to take those shots. They'll be worth 4 points now instead of 3. But at the same time, you're not going to see random people start taking 4-pointers. The guys that can barely hit 3-pointers now are not going to all of a sudden start taking 4-pointers because those are really difficult shots. So it's not like, people say, oh, you're just going to get all those guys jacking from deep. I would disagree. I would think that at first, the people that can already make those deep shots would just continue to take them and be rewarded an extra point for them. And then slowly, gradually, players that are elite 3-point shooters would start practicing 4-pointers. The elite 3-point shooters like Joe Harris would probably start trying to take deeper threes because he's already so good at the normal 3-point line. Maybe in the long run, you'll probably see a lot of kids growing up and young prospects. Maybe they could potentially be focusing too much on the 4-pointer.
I can
But
see that.
but that's where I think the whole difficulty of the shot would probably prevent that. I mean, it's going to be such a hard shot to master, and then I think if you can master it, you should be rewarded with an extra point. I mean, I think it's not something I think that people would just naturally, oh, it's in the league now. Oh, I'm going to take 204 pointers this year. No, I think you'd probably see a small quantity, and then each year the quantity of attempts from 4-point line would go up. But I'm not sure if there would be a point where everyone's only taking 4-pointers. And then, I just love to see what some of these offensive coaches could do with extra floor spacing. And, you get more offense, which I think would be good to attract a younger audience and make the NBA an even more popular sport. And I want to see revolutionary change on my watch. So there you go.
Listen, Eric's going to pound that drum. I'm there for it. It would be fun to see a Brook Lopez 4-point shot.
I would love. Who would be the? I'm trying to wonder who would be the weirdest big man to take the 4-pointer regularly. It probably would be Brook because he kind of really revolutionized the 3-pointer the most as a big man. But oh man, it'd be so interesting to see the dynamic of people trying to learn how to get comfortable shooting from there, and then seeing who could actually hit from there, what the percentages would be like, how it would change things. There's just so many interesting dynamics that would happen from adding the 4-point line.
For real, I could see maybe Al Horford getting one or two of those. Maybe Marc Gasol. Couldn't really. You're right. It'd have to be Brook Lopez who could take them. I mean, would be taking a lot of them at least, because it's weird. Gone are the days we had the big men are still shooting threes, but it's easy to remember Channing Frye or Al Harrington, Mehmet Okur, Dirk. Obviously, we'll see how DeMarcus looks when he gets back for sure. But yeah, that would be very, very interesting. I like that. Because look at this already.
I was going to say the toughest thing for big man taking that shot is, I mean, when you see guys like Curry and Dame shoot, they're using their legs, they're jumping into those shots because it's so from so far deep. But big man, they kind of shoot a set shot almost from 3, which would be harder if you brought them even farther from the basket. So I think that obviously the guards and wings would have a huge advantage here because they kind of have a more natural jump shooting motion. But it would be interesting to see.
I mean, for all we know, there could be the next Manute Bol who comes out of nowhere and just starts knocking down threes. And we're like, where did that come from? So that could definitely happen. Man,
well,
it's been a blast.
I already got your promotion for this episode on Twitter. I want to see a tweet whenever this episode comes out that says Eric Spyropoulos is calling for the 4-point line.
Dude, I am going to put that up there. This is going to be coming out probably tomorrow or Tuesday at the worst. It's coming out. And when this does, putting one plug for you on that. I'm putting another plug for me, putting the NBA to run the 14-second shot clock. And I'm going to get some eyes and ears on this one because this is hilarious.
Yeah,
wow. Well, listen, we're going to have to do this again, do a rule change. We're going to make this happen. This has to be a thing. 14-second shot clock, 4-point round. Let's just go crazy. Let's go wild. Let's just make it happen. All right, man. Well, I appreciate having you on, Eric. Thank you for giving me your time. It's been a whopper of a show. You've made history. This is the longest show we've had on NBA Today. So I'm glad you gave it to me. I think the second longest one I had was when I was doing the 80s breakdown of the worst teams in the 1989 season. I'm still doing that series. It was so long. I had a 2-week break after that. So I'm getting back on that. But thank you for hopping on and helping me out here, man. It's been a lot of fun, and we're gonna have to collaborate on this another time for sure. I already have ideas.
Dude, I appreciate it. Always great whenever we have microphones and a recording capacity in front of us. We just go on and on and on. But it's always fun, and we'll definitely have to do more in the future. Yeah.
Definitely, man. Definitely. So you can follow him at Eric Spyros NBA. SYROS NBA. Make sure to check out his writing, Nuggets.com. Am I right on that?
Yep, Nuggets.com.
All right. Great writer, man. Great. Obviously, as you're going to find out or listen, great basketball mind. Definitely make sure to come out. You can check me out if you have any interest after my 14-second shot clock idea. Corbin NBA on Twitter. Check out hoop-ball.com at hoopballtweets. And also, random shout, definitely make sure to check MyBookie out. Everyone, my.ag, give that 50% deposit back for whatever wagers you may take during this time, because we're bored, not much going on. who knows what you could be thinking. So definitely make sure to take care, keep your hands clean, maintain that social distancing, y'all, and hopefully I'll be back real soon. All right, y'all.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.